Aside from controlling the formatting of typography, controlling the color of elements on the page is probably the most common part of basic page styling. Let's take a look at ways that we can control color through using CSS. To do that, we will use the aptly named color.html file found in the 07_05 directory. And if I scroll down, I can see that it's pretty much the same page that we just left. So we're kind of picking up right where we left off. There is a new rule up top. It's the HTML rule. And that showcases one of the really interesting things that I find about CSS. There really isn't an element that you can't style. So remember, the HTML is the sort of the large parent tag. Well, some browsers recognize that as having intrinsic properties. So it's not a bad idea to go ahead and strip out things like margin and padding so that your spacing is consistent throughout all sites. Well, we're going to use this to apply some color. So if I go up to HTML and I choose background dash color, and for that color, I'm going to do #777 and then a semicolon. Now, most people, when they see this for color, they're like, huh? What are you talking about? This is what we call hexadecimal notation. Essentially, color is defined on the screen as RGB, red, green, and blue. And you can go from 0 to 255 for each of those values. And mixtures of those gives you all the colors that we can see on the screen, which are into the millions. What hexadecimal notation does for us is it basically breaks those values, red, green, and blue, into 3 separate values and allows us to express that based upon a hex value. And the hex value can be resolved into a number, and that number is between 0 and 255. So in the case of this one, we're using shorthand notation. So this is the same as us saying 77, 77, 77. So anytime you have 3 pairs of the same, so for example, even if I had something like 33, 66, 77, that could be represented as 367. I'm going to do 777, save that, and now if I preview the page, I can see that the entire background for my site is now that gray color that we just asked for. Now remember, our body element is only 70% of the width of the entire page, which would be HTML. So if I come into my body and I give it a background color as well, and if I want, I can just do the shorthand notation of background. I don't have to be specific as background dash color. That's very specific. I can just say, hey, for my background, let's make my background white, because you can do a lot of different things with your background. You can apply an image, for example, instead of a color. So if I wanted a graphic to appear behind everything, I could do that. So I'm going to say background is white. And now when I switch back over to the browser, I can see that what it's done is it's taken all the visual elements contained within body and it's given a background of white to that. So that gives us sort of this two-toned look that we're seeing now. Now, in addition to the backgrounds of elements, you can apply color to things like borders as well. So if I'm still in the body selector, I can come in and do something like border dash bottom. So apply a border to the bottom of the body element. And here I could do something like 10 pixels, so a really thick border, solid. So the style of it should be solid. And for color, I'm going to choose gold, solid gold, baby. If I save this and preview it, notice that we now get a solid gold border, 10 pixels wide at the bottom of the body tag. Cool. All right. So for border bottom, again, this is a shorthand notation. 10 pixels is the width, solid is the style, gold, of course, would be the color. Now, in the case of the gold border and the white background, we're using what's known as reserved keywords. And you can go into the CSS specification and check out some of those reserved keywords. There are a lot of them because recently they also supported the SVG reserved color notation too. So there's literally dozens of those reserved words. Now, I would like to point out it's not going to be consistent everywhere. So gold, for example, one browser might make that more yellow than another browser. You're basically just saying, hey, whatever color you normally reserve for gold, give me that. Although they are supposed to have reserved hex values, but it's not always honored. The last thing we're going to do, let's go down to the heading 1 and apply a background color to it as well. So if I go down to the heading 1, I can set a background on it. You know what? So far we've done hex values and we've done reserved colors, but we haven't done an RGB notation. So let's do that. RGB, and then in parentheses, we're going to do 44, 45, comma, 140. So what this does for us is it allows us to specify a specific RGB value. In this case, this is red, this is green, and this is the blue value. And brackets is being oh so helpful in showing me that that is going to be a blue color. So one of the things that is a little tricky about defining color in CSS, if you're going to use RGB notation, if you're going to use hexadecimal notation, or some of the other notations available like hue, saturation, and brightness, you really have to know what the values are before you get here. This isn't something that you play around with that often, usually using another program or a chart somewhere and pick the colors off of that. So if I save this, preview that in the background, now I can see that headline has a dark blue background. I also get to see how big the headline actually is. Headings are treated like block level elements, so they expand to fill their parent container. In this case, it's expanding to fill the width of my parent container, which is the body tag. Now, the last thing we're going to do is set the foreground color for the heading. So that black text on the blue background is a little hard to read. So I'm going to go right down and set one more property. I'm going to do color, and the color is going to be pound DDD. So that's, again, hexadecimal notation, and that's sort of a lighter gray. So if I save that, go into the browser, I can see that I have the lighter gray foreground color on the blue background. Now, again, this isn't the best looking page in the world now, but at least you get an idea of kind of how color works. Now, the color property, a lot of people get confused by this. You can see the difference between color and background, so much so that a lot of people actually refer to this property as foreground color instead of just color. As you can imagine, there's a lot more to applying color than what we've discussed here. For now, just focus on the fact that you can set color for most elements on their backgrounds, borders, and foreground content.